Good evening. I call this meeting to order at 6:15 p.m. Tonight, we have Director Stepp, Director Ramirez, Director Torres, Director Teitler, and myself present, meaning we have a quorum. Thank you to our interpreter. Would you please share the interpretation instructions with our participants, and then we can turn on the interpretation function. Thank you. The first business in order is the approval of the agenda. Directors, are there any proposed changes to the agenda?
I would like to propose that we change item 10, executive session, to after board appreciations. So it would go 9, 11, 12, 10.
Is there a second? All in favor of the agenda with that correction or change? Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Directors, you've just approved the agenda as amended. Our next agenda item is our opening celebrations and updates by our acting superintendent, Dr. Cole.
Good evening. Well, it's been a busy few weeks, but I want to start tonight with a quote from a visitor that we had in last week from Jane Goodall, who came to visit Clement Springs High School and Roaring Fork High School. And didn't necessarily say this when she was here, but it's a quote from Jane Goodall previously. And she writes that you cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. And so I want to frame this week's updates and celebrations on the impacts that our staff and community are having and the differences that they're making on the experiences, the opportunities, and the academic achievement of our students. We know that in mid-September, our teachers, our staff are in the classroom every day with students. They're building relationships. They're setting high expectations for students. They're helping them build skills to meet academic standards and goals. But we kind of have a joke in the Roaring Fork schools that just about every job description has a bullet point that says additional duties is assigned. And sometimes those are assigned and sometimes they're not. But some of the things that are happening and have happened in the last couple of weeks are because of the things that the additional tasks and roles that our teachers, that our staff take on. Jane Goodall's visit was a result of our staff, our teachers, our leaders, our front office teams really taking on extra duties to build relationships with local organizations, to advocate for our students, to get some face time with Jane Goodall, and then to facilitate logistics to bring such a renowned and inspiring leader to schools to meet with our kids. We also, you might have seen the article in the Aspen Times that Mr. Bradley at Basalt High School is bringing a wildlife biologist, David Niels, to work and do authentic field research on mountain lions. So we have, in addition, I think a lot of families in our community right now are helping kids and prepare for field trips. We have a lot of experiential education happening at this time of year. And the logistical planning for those trips is significant. And our staff and our teachers and our admin really take a lot of time to manage these small and large adventures into from everywhere, like our local gardens to our wilderness areas. We also, at this time of the year, a lot of our committees and across the district have kicked off. So our district accountability committee had their first meeting. Our school accountability committees are starting to meet. Our district housing committee, family advisory council, district wellness committee all launched within the last 2 weeks, had their first meetings. And we see staff showing up at those meetings, maybe because they've been asked to, but often just because they care and they're curious about the work and they're taking on that additional work. I think another update that we have in September is we have a lot of colds and flus, and COVID is back. And we're managing it. We're hanging in there. And I think in terms of additional duties and impact and meaningful difference, we have some amazing guest teachers that step in, but we also still need guest teachers. And so we see staff and teachers cross-covering, really stepping up to support each other and make sure that our kids are having continuity, routines, and consistency. So we're seeing all of that happening this time of year. And then addition to that, the other piece that we're really celebrating at this time is the routine of coaching is happening consistently across all of our schools. In terms of us really reaching our goals around high quality instruction, we use coaching as a really key lever. And our schools and our teams have really committed deeply to this work. It's starting. Supervisors are in classrooms, are providing coaching and feedback to teachers and staff. So in addition to all these other things that they do, they also participate in welcoming feedback and continuous improvement cycles and strengthening practice. And our teachers and our staff are really accustomed to having visitors come in the room and do walkthrough assessments and provide feedback. And that work is happening now too. So the cadence of that is happening in our schools. And we're having an impact on our kids through this work. Attendance is up, and we'll have some updates on attendance and some of the strategies, but we're seeing really positive trends kind of year over year in almost all of our schools, that it's looking better than it ever has before. Student achievement and growth is on a positive trajectory. Tons of work still to do on that. You'll hear from Chief Park more on that tonight, but we're getting indicators that we're heading in the right direction. And then we're also really seeing the impacts and the difference that is made through community engagement. As you all know, our strategic planning process is we're kicking into that phase 2. So last week we hosted 2 community focus groups in Carbondale and Basalt. We had a very small but mighty turnout, really interesting conversations where families and stakeholders were highlighting the strengths of the Roaring Fork School District and really lifting up our cultural, linguistic, and socioeconomic diversity, and also really lifting up this incredible valley, and that the efforts that our schools make to make sure kids get to experience this valley and learn how to be good stewards and learn from this place that we live. We're also hearing in those focus groups about the challenges that we face, I think really aligned to what we see as equity and student achievement. We have been talking about cost of living and the impacts that has on staff recruitment, retention. We've been talking about district communication, accountability. So lots of areas for growth and really great conversations that we're having. So just want to remind folks that the last in-person focus group session is tomorrow. It's 6 o'clock at Glenwood Springs Elementary School. English and Spanish. We'll have a big team ready to listen. And those focus group sessions take about an hour, and there'll be childcare. Also, just want to celebrate the Family Advisory Council and District Wellness Committee met last night in the Colorado room. We had actually really wonderful turnout. We had over 16 families show up and family members show up that really reflected the diversity of our community. The first meeting for the Family Advisory Council, the participants really identify their priorities and develop their agenda. So some of the things that were shared that the Family Advisory Council and District Wellness Committee will work on this year include student well-being, better understanding coordinated academic, social, emotional supports, our special education services, supporting and strengthening nutritional services, strengthening district communication and parent partnerships, and then continuing to strengthen and align comprehensive health education resources. So lots to celebrate as we're in the work, and we're just really grateful for all these investments, these additional duties that people step up, especially our staff in terms of time and effort and expertise, especially our families leaning in. They're having meaningful impacts and they're making a difference.
Thank you, Dr. Cole. The next business in order is a presentation from Chief Park.
Good evening, directors. Can you hold on? Is this on? Yep. Okay. This evening, I'm presenting our preliminary district and school performance frameworks, as well as our CMAS and PSAT, SAT growth data for our subgroups. So I'll start out with our preliminary district performance ratings. It's labeled preliminary because the final, although these are pretty official, the final ratings are presented after the December state board meeting at that time. As a reminder, there was an accountability pause between 2019 and 2021, and accountability by the state resumed in 2022 as a transitional year. So this year is the second year once that's process started again. And so as you can see here, we can have some growth celebrations for elementary and middle, less so at this time for our for our high schools, but overall our middle and high schools have an accredited rating and for informational purposes, and our elementary currently at improvement, making some growth there. Over here, when we look at our individual school performance ratings, we've included 2019, than 2022 and 2023. And so there is some celebrations. I like to say green is good, blue is better, but we are excited when we have when we see the numbers of schools at performance. Something that's not evident here, but is a highlight, is that 11 of our 14 schools increased their point totals on their school performance framework, as well as our district rating. And of particular highlight is Glenwood Springs Elementary School, who, as we know, last year was rated as turnaround, and in 1 year made 2 levels of improvement from turnaround to improvement. And so that's a pretty impressive growth. And Glenwood Springs Middle and Riverview also went up a level from improvement to performance. And Crystal River is actually maintaining steady growth in their framework points. Aside from what is shared here, our accountability participation rate across the district does meet the 95% participation as well. I'm going to move over to our CMAS and PSAT, SAT growth by grade. So a couple of board meetings ago, we shared our achievement data and our overall median growth percentiles by grade, but not yet by subgroup. So we have first, our CMAS ELA subgroup growth by grade. Here you can see that all of our subgroups across the district outpaced the state, their peers, when we compared the district MGP and the statewide MGP. Sixth grade is outpacing growth, largely driven by our white students, non-multilingual and non-minority students, and students without IEPs. And so as an area that we have also named, it's great overall that we have some overall growth, but we are keenly keeping an eye on our subgroup growth as well. Across the district, when you're seeing our median growth percentile, you can see a difference of about 5 MGP points between the different subgroups. And similar to CMAS similar to CMAS ELA, all of our subgroups in the district outpaced growth as compared to their peers across the state. Across the state, not the street. And in 8th grade, nearly all of our subgroups outpaced the growth, with the exception of our gifted and not gifted students. One note I want to make here, actually, where you see the X's is where across the grade level, there were less than 20 students identified as gifted. However, those MGP averages are included in the total number. And so just want to explain that there. So here with our PSAT and SAT, a note here in high school EBRW growth, it includes PSAT 9, PSAT 9 to PSAT 10, and PSAT 10 to SAT. That's why there's an X in our 9th grade column, because there is not growth calculated for EBRW for 9th grade. You can see here that our students with IEPs had the greatest difference in MGP as compared to students not on IEPs. It's primarily driven by our 10th grade, as you can see the difference in MGP there. In high school math, the growth is calculated with CMAS 8th grade math to PSAT 9, and then PSAT 9 to PSAT 10, and then PSAT 10 to SAT. So that's why there is a 9th grade metric there. And growth here we can see is a little lower than the state with our overall MGP of 47. And so I'm not going to go line by line here. You have this here, but just some notes in terms of what our leaders are doing and our next steps are. They've all dug into their own schools performance frameworks. This is a primary topic in our check-ins over the past month with leaders. Dug into their CMAS and PSAT data. We've done training on how to leverage our EduClimber platform to pull disaggregated data across these metrics. They've also been using our beginning of year NWA performance to help determine the supports for students, whether that's intervention, different class scheduling, tutoring, et cetera. They're also digging deeper into formative assessments with the particular focus on looking at subgroup performance as well. This has been something that we have been in conversations about over the past year, and continuing that conversation, particularly because while we have areas to celebrate, we do know that we want to narrow the difference in achievement and growth between our subgroups. And I'll open up for questions.
Thank you. Director Torres, we'll start board discussion with you.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Chief Rex. This is great. And I completely agree. I think you said it the best when there's so much to celebrate, but also I wouldn't say but and
And.
also staying focused and staying committed to continuing to, obviously address the achievement gaps in the growth. You had mentioned targeted interventions for those subgroups in the areas of growth. And in regards to like the tutoring, how does the accelerated learning plan or the accelerated plan help with some of these areas? I know we're having professional development and there's other areas to support. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah,
how
and the
that
thing I want to
ties?
say here is that this is obviously overall district growth. And so the students who are getting additional supports vary by school, and it's dependent on how those students are doing in that school. This is an aggregate across of our district. But when we think about the ways in which we're supporting, we're trying to make sure that every content area and grade level has a guaranteed and viable curriculum. That is, we've talked about that in the past. We are implementing elementary illustrative math this year. So this is our very first year that we have a K-12 math curriculum, which is exciting. And we're continuing that work in identifying what curricular areas need some more support. And so that's one thing in terms of the plan itself, particularly because we want to make sure they're really good materials in front of kids. Coaching itself is happening, like Dr. Cole mentioned. It has been a core of our district in terms of development for teachers for a while. And so that is ongoing. And specifically to your question about intervention and tutoring, based on the school, most, if not all of our schools have scheduled in a dedicated either intervention or acceleration time. And so part of the work now or in the beginning of this year is looking at our beginning of year data to identify the kids that should be in that group or in that class. With the tutoring that happens, we have a combination. One is continuing our work with Tutored by Teachers for the schools that have opted to participate in it, and that it's largely during school delivered virtually by tutors. We also have a Summit 54 sponsored tutoring for elementary that occurs after school. The first group has not started yet. That's starting in October. And that has been in place for several years. So that's just two of them, of the most sort of formalized tutoring.
Thank you.
Dr. Tyler.
Thank you for all of this information. It's really nice to see how it's broken down and very informational. I have a couple questions about the differences by subgroups. Has there been any data done to look at how students from Basalt Elementary and Riverview who are in bilingual programs, and have they been sectioned out to say how they are doing comparatively in their growth in 5th, 6th, 7th grade, people who are in the program K through 4?
Schools have examined their own. Are you saying, have we presented to the district like a side-by-side, here's Basalt Basalt Elementary or Riverview, or as compared to Crystal River and other non-dual language schools?
Not necessarily from the schools, but I know like for most of the bilingual programs that they're ending in 4th grade, or maybe at Riverview at the
8th
higher
grade.
grades. But like,
Mhm.
I guess, yes, looking at those students compared to other students and seeing if there's any data that's showing that those students have performed equally better or worse.
I think we can probably dig deeper into that, more intentionally into that. I think my curiosity is the wonder whether there's a program assessment question or program effectiveness.
Yes, I think that would be the question I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, we do look at it by school. I think and leaders obviously have access to their school's data. The performance wise, it's part of the questions might be, what is the difference in the programming that we have? But it's largely also it's a series of questions. What is instruction like? What is the consistency there?
Mm-hmm.
And I think program might be one of the questions, but it's not necessarily the core question, just because we know that the program varies from school to school.
Thank you. And then bringing up programming and talking about programming, is there anything that is in the district's idea generation about like, what are we doing for these? Because if you're looking at it's non-minorities, minority students, FRL eligible students, Hispanic students are the ones who are having these gap behind considerably. Other than saying we're doing viable curriculums and all of these for all students, is there anything specifically targeted that the district is looking at doing for those groups of students that maybe have different needs than the other students?
I think the way to best actually answer that question is think about across the board, what are the foundational things we need in place? One of them includes attendance. So we see some differences in attendance as well across our schools, our grades, and our kids. And so the first step is, are we getting kids to school so that they can be here and they can learn? There's a lot of effort in that actually right now with our district attendance plan, the support with attendance specialists and our MTSS team to do that. And so I think and from there, we do look at which subgroups are more highly impacted or have differences in attendance rates and how are we supporting them? Because a lot of the times we're actually trying to figure out like the root cause and address that. And it's less because you are in this particular subgroup. And so with the question of, are you attending to this particular subgroup? I want to think about it as, here's actually the data that we have, how are we going to support all of our kids and elevate that? And so when we think about multilingual learners, there is intentional CLDEPD for teachers, for departments, the intentional coaching that's happening. And when we're looking at, let's say, the instructional model and how it's playing it out in a classroom, it often, I could speak to my conversations with leaders have been about equity and participation. Like, what are we expecting from kids? How is that coming out in the classroom?
That all makes sense. I just guess I would hope that we could dig deeper too and looking at what kind of different programming we can do because of the fact of children entering with limited language resources is putting them in different needs. And so I would hope that we are doing something different for those children who have different needs. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Director Stepp.
Thank you, Chief Park. It's always amazing to dig into the data. I just had a couple of clarifying questions, and I feel like I should know this, but on the first slide where you have the performance ratings broken down to elementary, middle, and high, when it says approaching, is there like a percentage range for that? Like, so it could be, if the range is 50 to 75, it could be 50 is approaching, it could be 75 is approaching. It's just like, it's nice to see the visual of yellow and green, but I don't like, if it's approaching, are we looking at how close they are to meeting, if that makes sense?
Yeah, let me just find it here. Sorry, if you look at in our SPF, every SPF on the last page actually has a descriptor of all of the percentages that give the points. That's what I'm looking for here.
Okay. And then, do you know what it's actually measuring for post-secondary and workforce readiness in the high school level? Is it how many people go on to college or get a, like, how do they measure that?
Yep. So in the district performance framework, measures it by the SAT EBRW, the SAT math, dropout rate, matriculation rate, and then, sorry, let me find this next one. And the graduation rate.
Graduation rates.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the school performance ratings, is it only says accredited for the district, right? And then the schools that are in green, it says performance, like each school isn't accredited, just the district is, right?
Correct. And I apologize. The memo that was linked in this week was incorrect. There's actually a memo that describes all of the SPF and DPF information. So I apologize. We'll put that correct one in the notes. For the district, there are 5 ratings. It's accredited with distinction, accredited with improvement plan, accredited with priority improvement plan, or accredited with turnaround plan. And so accredited for district is equivalent to like the green, and then there's one higher level. For schools, there's only 4 plan types. The highest is performance plan, the next is improvement, the third is priority improvement plan, and the fourth is turnaround plan.
Okay. That's all the questions I had right now. I have to look at that memo more.
And we'll put the correct one in there.
Director Ramirez.
Thank you, Chief Park. Kudos to GSES on their 2 levels of improvement. I think that's amazing. I just want to make sure that I clarify that according to our data, by the way, this is probably the best disaggregated data I've ever seen. So thank you for this. But it looks that essentially all of our non-minority groups, including students who are on IEPs or multilingual, all of the students that don't fall under those categories are achieving at 6 points or higher, sometimes 10, in all of the data and all of these tests.
The median growth percentile, not achievement. Yeah.
Is that correct?
Are you looking at the district column compared to each other?
Yeah.
I'm looking at CMS ELA subgroup growth. If you're looking at that, so if we're looking compared to the subgroups, I believe the range is for each one, it varied. And I put it in the memo, and so I want to make sure I'm saying it correctly.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at not free and reduced lunch, non-minority students, white, non-bilingual learners, students not on IEPs, and gifted. I'm also just in looking at all of this data, I'm also reflecting that our students on IEPs are actually at least 10 points below. And I'm sorry, on growth. And so I just want to.
Sorry, which slide are you looking at?
I'm just looking at all compared to the students not on IEPs. That's the number.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And when looking at across the district.
Right. So I just want to ask, what are we doing to remedy that specifically with students? Because I agree with Director Teitler that there is an obvious gap in growth that we're seeing, but I'm just in being able to look at this, the students on IEPs are really falling below the curve. Are we doing anything to work towards remedying that right now?
I mean, the ensuring that all of the teachers and leaders are aware of the services that are outlined in IEPs, understanding how to monitor progress appropriately is something that's been intentional and is monitored and reinforced in training. And then it is a challenge. I'm not gonna lie. It's a challenge to figure out right ratios, right programming, the right supports. I really value all of our existing special education teachers because they are diamonds, and it is very hard. I mean, when we think about we want to serve all of our student population, and this is a particular challenge. And so when we think about program, we have thought, what do we need to do as a district to appropriately support and staff students in these programs? Because they include students in our SSM programs, our students with IEPs who are in mild moderate. Either way, I think getting talented, experienced special educators is something we are always trying to do. And I think that's one of the first steps. I think we can try to say, we're going to do this thing in this program, but ultimately there's a human being in front of the students in front of them. And so that's really important too. And so
is there a goal that we are aiming for growth for our next test?
For the end of the year?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just
and it's
be aiming for growth in any of these for students on IEPs.
Yes, of course. Yes.
What is that?
I mean, I can't tell you all of them by grade, but when you're looking at the subject and grade, it is dependent. And when we try to think about an ambitious and feasible growth goal, they are set. I'd have to get you the ones actually from our director of special education. But for all of our subgroups, it is something we do keep a keen eye on, and we do set growth goals based on that. At the bottom line, we want to make sure that all of our kids are hitting their goals that are outlined in their IEP at a minimum. And then that is obviously created for that individual student that may or may not be reflected in PSAT, SAT, and CMAS, but certainly comparative to their peers across the state, we do want to at least match that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Park. I agree that this data is great to have and the breakdown is incredible. I just wanted to confirm that what you're going to attach is the preliminary performance framework.
Yes, the staff
Okay.
memo, yeah, for the school and district performance frameworks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I went to the CD website to pull it and it's not published there yet. It's still the 2022 one because this is
Yeah.
preliminary.
The memo doesn't have that, but we can share the district framework. Yep.
Okay.
Thank
'Cause
you.
it's- Yeah, because it's not on School View yet. or on
It
the
probably won't
website.
until December because
Okay.
after it goes to state board meeting.
And my question is somewhat broad, but we know that you all set a broad goal last year of moving every student one band in achievement. And so do these growth scores indicate that that movement is happening? Are we on track to meet that goal?
We are on track. We did not hit every single student improving at least one performance band.
But the growth scores are,
Growth scores are pretty the same,
Yeah.
yes. And so it was an ambitious goal to move everyone, and we're still emphasizing every kid can grow, and we can set a goal that every kid will grow at least one level. So we're maintaining that. We have not hit that yet.
excellent. Thank you. That was my only question. So we will now move into 5 minutes of board discussion and questions.
I
guess
did
Oh,
Go ahead.
Sorry, I did have a question. And it was actually for Acting Superintendent Cole. I'm wondering when the Equity Advisory Council is meeting. I know you mentioned some of the meetings that have already happened.
Yeah, it's coming up next Thursday.
Thursday, where
Mhm.
at?
Here at the district office. I believe it starts at 6.
Thank you.
I was just wanting to say, I think it needs to be a broader discussion of ours to say, what is the district doing as a whole for our non-white minority FRL students that we see they are behind, and obviously it's nobody's fault that they're behind, but it is something that has been a trend that continues to be a trend. And I think that we need to address it in some way and say they are coming in with different needs as students. With the example is when they're coming to kindergarten, so many students are language deficient in English, not deficient, but they're behind in their English proficiency. And if they're behind in their English proficiency, I think we have to consider they have different needs. And I understand that in our CDLE, CLDE,
CLDE.
yeah.
programming, that we are doing things that are helping them, but that is just like a small portion of the day that they're receiving that help during that day. And what are we doing as a broad scope for these students who do have different needs? And it seems to me that we are not doing anything particularly different for these students than we are for the whole general student. And it seems like that needs to be a discussion that we move forward to say, what kind of programming change do we need to do to address those needs? Or I feel like we will continue to have that struggling population. And I understand as though higher grades, that is a difficulty to look at them at higher grades, because by the time they're to 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, they've already been behind the majority of those students and they're not closing the gap. And so what we need to do is something at the earlier grades, and to figure out like what kind of programming are we going to do so that gap doesn't exist as it gets to later grades. So I would like to have a further, deeper conversation as a board on that.
Well, and I had asked the question as far as those intervention strategies in the tutoring. I think there's a part of that too, that there's some intervention that takes place outside of the classroom that helps the students that are needing targeted, support with whatever there is that they're falling behind or struggling with or need support with. And I wonder too how that could become there's more accountability for those tutorings, because I know even from having a high schooler that tutoring's kind of attended to in the beginning, and then it's like, oh, nobody's going to pay attention if I'm not. And versus if you're not in English class, we get an alert that you've missed, or something that could be, I don't know, more impactful in regards, I don't know what that looks like as far as the attendance policy, maybe even with those interventions or with those strategies to help support students. I mean, to the greatest extent that you can, you want so badly for students to also want to be there. But
Well, can I add something? We had brought this up a couple meetings ago when we first looked at this data, but and kind of your example is, you know, they're behind, and by the time they get to 6th or 7th grade, you know, they're really far behind. But people or families and students are coming in all 12 grades, right? So, and I think what you brought up, Chief Park, before was that these are the state designations, because I think it's really unfair to just put everybody in Hispanic, you know, and because there's people that have grown up here and may be more proficient. And then there's somebody that comes and they're 16 years old. So we put them in 10th grade and they don't know any English. And so it's almost like we need to use CASB or go to the state level to say we need 2 different designations within this subgroup, because lumping everybody together is not doing the data any, you know, it's skewing the data. But you know, those interventions are different if you're bilingual versus you're a new arrival and you don't know any English. But and I don't know like how we place them. You know, it's, well, they're this age, so they go in this grade, or do we, you know, they might be at 4th grade, but they're 16 years old. Like how that is really mind boggling to me. But I think it's something that we need to look at, and if need to go to the state level and try to get some changes made.
Madam Sorry, Madam Chair, I know we've run out of time, but I just want to make a suggestion that we push this into a work session, this data set, so that we could actually have conversation about what this looks like for the board moving forward. I think it would be good to go through this data with you.
Dr. Park, did you want to say something?
I did want to just make a few comments. So to the question about the students, our emerging bilingual students, it's true they do have an ELD class, but we also actually primarily focus our PD on what happens in the rest of the day. Like when we're thinking about our high schoolers and middle schoolers, because you're right, 45 minutes, 55 minutes in one class is not the only time a student needs language support. And so that's actually a primary focus. It's in our CLDE reviews, it's in our PD, and it's our focus there. The other thing about newcomers, we do have newcomer courses in our high schools, specifically because we do get 16-year-olds who just arrived to the country, and we cannot just plop them into a regular biology class or regular, math class. And so we do have that as a supportive measure. But I do like the idea where you're thinking, you know, how do we actually lobby to get some more nuanced designations from the state? And then with the tutoring, for example, our tutored by teachers is the group that we are working with, provides it during the day, and actually is not like the kids are not going to a meeting in a separate room, but it is delivered online in a group, and they've actually been really good. We piloted last year. They're excellent with sending attendance reports, communicating with the homeroom teacher or the contact at the school. Here's the attendance, here's kids who came, here's kids who didn't. And so leaders have been able to, and teachers have been able to follow up. They also really monitor engagement. And so that was in our high school that piloted last year. That was one of the things they make key things they address. How do we keep kids motivated and going, and getting the most out of it.
Can I also, one of the things I think, Director Tytler, in your question that might be helpful during a work session is for us to dig more deeply as well into our 23-24 Unified Improvement Plan action plan, because that plan really outlines the steps that I think you're asking about of how are we really targeting supports for our emerging bilingual students. And there's a number of really key in our major improvement strategies and our core strategies in that UIP that talk about some of the key training that we're doing. It targets schools around making content comprehensible, equitable grading, equitable feedback, really, training teachers on that tighter. And I think as Chief Park mentioned, and we've talked about a lot, that our Latino students are our majority. And so we can't be doing this work as a tier 2 intervention for some kids when this is the majority. So there's a strong emphasis you'll see in our UIP action plan around strengthening tier 1 instruction, having clarity with teachers on a vision for excellence and rigor, how to make sure we're holding kids to that high standard and making sure those supports are there, that we're on pace, we're on track. And we could really, I think, dig a little deeper into, I think, what you're looking for of like, what are we actually doing? What does this really look like? Because that through line is there. I think we just have to get into the plan so that you can see those pieces where we're really centering our majority population that, as we've all seen, we're seeing significant gaps in achievement and growth. And I think there's a lot there that I think we should look at as a team and really see. And I think, probably, especially as we get into the fall, what's going on with those strategies? Are they happening? What are we starting to see? What are the interim outcomes that we're seeing from these levers that are part of that plan?
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Park.
Thank you.
At this time, we would welcome members of the public who have signed up to address the board. There are no speakers signed up for tonight. The board typically allots 45 minutes for public comment to respect the time of all who are present. Speakers are to limit their remarks to 3 minutes or less. Members of the public who wish to share their views with the board may always do so in writing at any time. For this evening's public comment, we received one written comment. The next business in order is the approval of the consent agenda, which includes routine personnel, minutes from our previous board and minutes from our previous board meeting. There are no policies on consent this evening. Do I have a motion to approve?
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
I second.
Call to vote?
Director Stepp,
Aye.
Director Ramirez,
Aye.
Director Kuhlenberg,
Aye.
Director Torres,
Aye.
Director Tytler.
Aye.
Directors, you've just passed the consent agenda as presented. The next business in order is discussion on policies JBB, AC, and GBAA. We will begin. Sorry, I'll let you guys come up first. Director Tytler will begin with you for this round on these policies.
I only had or maybe two questions on the JBB and the first paragraph at the end of it, where it talks about the Title IX coordinator. Why is that not coming up? And am I in the wrong one? No, I'm sorry. The first paragraph under where it says reporting, investigation, and sanctions, that it says Title IX coordinator, and it doesn't mention like who that is, the head of HR, like it does in the other places, in the other policies where it talks about Title IX coordinator. And so it might be good just to change that to match the other policies that we were looking at. And then my only other question on this one is, it talks about, and I should do better about seeing where in it.
Which policy are you on? Sorry.
Are we on JBB, right?
All three.
Three.
Oh, I'm sorry, on JBB.
Okay.
Also on JBB, it says the policy and complaint procedures must be referenced in student and employee handbooks, described in hard copy notices. I'm just curious of how this happens at the student level. Like, how is this put out to students? Is there like a handbook for students that they're reading and know that this exists?
There's a handbook. I think your question, if we, I think just make it really clear and explicit of the resources that are there.
Mhm. And is this something that like students are just told, there's a handbook that you can read?
Some of the schools have planners that have information in there, but it's not necessarily a. I don't want to put words in leaders' mouths and teachers' mouths in how they direct students to understand, and parents and families. I do know in orientations in beginning of your meetings, there's overall information that is shared.
That's it. Thank you.
Director Stepp?
I don't have any specific questions at this time.
Director Ramirez?
Chief Park, to Director Tytler's question about how we're making sure students see this. Are we tracking to ensure that there is proof that high schools, middle schools, elementary schools are sharing this information with student and families?
Not that I'm aware of. It doesn't mean it's not happening. I'm not aware of it.
I think it would be wise maybe for us to ensure that this is, especially as we've updated it, to make sure that either the language is put in here somewhere or that we put it as part of a regulation, that this is something that we can say with certainty that it is happening. Because I think this policy and these policies specifically, I think are really important, not just for staff, but for students and families to have. I also had a suggestion on JBB. Trying to remember where I put it. I think it's under reporting, investigation, and sanctions. We have students are encouraged and expected to report all incidents of sexual harassment to a teacher, counselor, or principal in their school building or other available means such as anonymous reporting. I'm wondering if they're, instead of putting a teacher, counselor, or principal, that we put a trusted staff member or trusted school. I mean, I believe all of our school employees should be mandatory reporters, correct?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I personally feel like there are plenty of students who would say that their most trusted adult is neither of these three. And I think we should make sure we expand to include all staff within the school that they trust. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Torres.
I think we all had very similar questions in accessibility to students, and there was in JBB, the section age appropriate language. So I would encourage in the distribution of getting this information out to students. It says must be written in simple and age appropriate language. And it's not quite clear how that's getting distributed to students and the ease in which they have access to knowing what that means. I would absolutely agree with Director Ramirez and the trusted staff. I think if there is a way to also say that trusted staff member, then obviously goes to the school leadership too, or whatever it might be, the next step in that process. The other one I have a question about, and this is just, I'm just not sure, and I'd love to know more. On policy AC, it says on in page 2 of 5, the notice will be disseminated to persons with limited English language skills in the person's own language. So are we saying that any language that is the person's language, we are issuing this policy AC? So that is any language across the board. And is that upon request, or is it just already available? It seems surprising that we would say, I mean, you could speak any language and we're going to issue this policy. I would just like to know a little bit more about that, or if it's upon request. Can somebody help?
You know, I would say, and actually, and Chief Landon weigh in, because we were just looking at this, that a lot of our resources using Google formats have the pretty smooth capacity to use a Google Translate option with a multitude of languages. So we have that capacity. We all know there's limitations with Google Translate. Right. We are working on a plan to ensure that our especially our student and family and community facing policies are available in Spanish, knowing that that's the primary language of most of our families at home. I think the any language, what we've seen other districts do is really rely on kind of Google Translate's capacities to do that. And so that's kind of what we've seen, the way this sort of language covers the any language piece.
I was wondering if it was Google Translate. So my only concern with that is we know that Google Translate doesn't always capture things correctly, and especially on a policy about non-discrimination and equal opportunity. It would be really good to just have a caveat to the best of our ability and further clarification on a policy. I would hate for a word to be switched in Google Translate in relation to a discrimination inquiry that could lead to some miscommunication, I guess was, that just is a very bold statement. And relying on Google Translate if we don't have it. Spanish is obviously, we have another person who could ensure that that is adequately translated, but in a language that's not as common, I would just take some pause with that. Was my only, I'm out of time, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My follow-up to that would be, let's make sure that that is not a requirement, because this is a federal law and this is a federally required policy. And I suspect that there's a requirement in the federal legislation that this be available in the person's home language. So I wouldn't make any changes unless we're certain that it still complies with federal law. And then I had a couple of, no, I don't remember. We got to really delve into these pretty deeply in policy committee, which was great. Oh, so I wanted to follow up with my comment in GBAA, and just make the rest of the board aware that this is something that we want to in the future ensure is included within MOUs with our partners, our district partners who are in our schools, and understanding that there's an expectation that they adhere to these policies. And Chief Landon suggested some language there that I think it would be worth us all taking a look at. It's in GBAA at the bottom of the second paragraph. I have it highlighted and then in the
JBB.
GBAA. So we changed some wording there, or changed some things, but I would just encourage you to read through that and see if that's something that we're all in agreement on. And then switching over to JBB related to the communications with students. That was one of the things that I flagged as well, and actually proposed that we strike the information or communication regarding this policy must be written, but just that it must be in simple and age appropriate language, because I'm thinking through how this is presented to our students. I had a lot of the same questions that came to mind. Like, is this a written policy that we're giving to second graders? Like, how are we doing this? And even if it's not written, it should also be in simple and age appropriate language. So it seems like we all have some questions around there. And so I just wanted to flag that again, because that seems to be a theme. But other than that, all of my questions were addressed during policy committee. Thanks. So we'll now have 5 minutes for open discussion.
So I just wanted to follow up to one of the pieces on GBAA. You mentioned, you're talking about this policy similarly applies to non-employee volunteers on that second
Yeah.
paragraph, or
Yeah.
Okay.
Just because we have so many partnerships and people within our district and within our schools and with our students. And so ensuring that if this policy applies to them, that is somehow written somewhere within our MOUs with these partners.
Yeah.
That they are subject to this policy just as anyone else
Yes,
is.
I guess I'm wondering why we put similarly.
It just means the same.
Yeah.
Like it also applies.
Because I would feel like we should just say this policy applies to a non-employee volunteers or any other persons who work subject to the control. Like I totally agree. And I also think, let's just make it policy. Let's just make it as effective as possible in the language. I think that's a good catch. I definitely think we should make sure that it's part of our MOUs, that there is either this or these policies are shared with them. While when we are signing contracts, to ensure that there is alignment with both the organization and the district. I also just wanted to flag the oh my gosh, it just escaped my brain. There was the other thing you mentioned in the beginning. It's gone now, guys.
The written.
That's a really
striking
good one.
written for the younger.
No,
No, I mentioned something else before that and I don't remember either.
all right, whoever's next.
So I just have a question. we're in our 5-minute discussion now?
Yeah.
I know a lot of this is federal law and verbiage that we need to have in there, but I know over the past couple of years, there have been reports of this type of harassment. And I wonder, I don't know if this makes sense or not, but to run those particular events and happenings through these new policies to make sure that the victim, the accused, the district is like everyone's covered, is it, but we've have examples. And so is this enough to? So it's just a suggestion, and I probably is a lot of work, but just because I know we know it happens and we want to protect everyone involved.
I remembered.
Okay.
It was Director Torres who brought up of the language, and I wanted to just echo Director Kuhlenberg's sentiments that I think first there's law, but then I also think we as a district should prioritize ensuring that these policies that are like it's in the language that we're going to distribute them are done by a professional and are done in a way that we are not using Google Translate to, be the sole entity that we're using. I just think like these are the types, especially we're saying we're going to do this annually, we're going to send it out. They have to be correct when they go out to families. And I don't know if we need to include language in here saying what that's going to look like when it goes out, but I just wanted to make sure I echoed the sentiment that it should be done by a professional.
The last thing that I would want to flag for the board that we talked about in policy committee were the lists identifying what constitutes harassment. And that was a conversation that we had about whether to include those lists or not. Because on the one hand, it's great to have some examples of what clearly constitutes harassment. On the other hand, we don't want to limit ourselves to some behavior that is not specifically enumerated, but is clearly harassing behavior. But because we didn't list it out, there's an argument to be made that it's not harassment. So just in thinking about this as it comes up for next read,
Can we bold that sexual harassment as defined above may include, but is not limited to in our policy?
bold that is
Not limited to.
but is not limited to.
I think that clarifies it.
Yeah, and there is some value in giving examples.
Right.
Because there are times, I'm not saying in this particular case, where having something to say that kidding is not appropriate, where it may not otherwise be explicitly written or expressed. So, but I agree, something, all caps, not limited. But I agree.
I'm assuming we have other harassment policies, not this is first based on sexual, but we have other like non-discrimination stuff like religion and race. And
We do not.
We do not.
Right, we have.
AC is our general.
We have the general non-discrimination policy. That's right, kind of as a catch-all.
Mhm.
But we make policies, so we can always.
Correct. The board
Okay.
creates policy. So if that's something that you're interested in, I would encourage you to bring it forward. Anything else on these before we wrap it up?
Thank you, team.
Could I just highlight, I think one thing that's interesting and I think important change that has a very practical application difference is that in JBB, and we talked about this in policy committee, that the recommendation in the new language from CASB and what we're currently looking at has the specification that the students will receive training at least once every 3 years on this policy. So what we're talking about is a policy that's really leading and saying there is curriculum that will be provided every 3 years. And so, I know that we've talked about sexual harassment. I know that came up through the health curricular standards. So I just want to make sure that you see, because we see this too, that the board is confidently leaning in and saying, this is important that this happens every 3 years. Kids are trained in that. Of course, that's going to look really different for K2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 12. And so I just really want to stamp that because that's new to this.
I think it's a critical step in the support of this policy, in the application of it.
And while we're still on this, I just want to thank the whole team for their work on this and for their willingness to include pieces like that really do help from a board perspective. And I think, for everyone within our schools to have these accountability pieces and to be able to lean in and make the changes that fit for our communities and our schools. So I appreciate the willingness to work on those and to make those changes.
Sorry. That last one, thank you for bringing that up. And yes, I saw it and I thought it was great. And I didn't know it was Casby, but yay, Casby.
What?
The 3 years.
That's not Casby.
Oh, I thought that's what, okay.
No,
I
I added
misunderstood.
that, or we
Thank
added that
you,
during policy
Director
committee.
Kuhlenberg, for adding that.
Yeah.
Is there a way in the regulation we're gonna track that? Of a student, we have a student that didn't come with the class in 8th grade who's supposed to have that.
That's a great question. I mean, that's gonna have to be in, once as you guys
Yeah.
execute and affirm this policy, then we have to build those regulations and accountability
Okay.
measures. So I would say not yet, but it's certainly for us that's a big for us on this iteration of the policy. It's like, okay, how are we gonna do that? How are we gonna make sure it's happening? How do we make sure, this is moving, there's some crossover to the health education curriculum and then opt-out policies. So we got to figure out how all that comes together when we're saying we're doing this lesson on sexual harassment per policy JBB. So we have to, we're gonna have to figure that out.
Build it up.
Thank you.
Regulation. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay. For the change to our agenda at the beginning, we'll move on to board reports and comments, and we will begin with Director Step.
Just two quick ones, with Acting Superintendent Cole and, Chief Markham. We met with, executive team of the Colorado River BOCES to, discuss some common concerns. I think I brought this up last time. We're working on an MOU. We're working on, trying to forecast budgeting information that we've been asking for 3 years and still don't have. So hopefully we'll hold them accountable to getting us that information that will help us manage that partnership better. And then upcoming next week is a career and technical advisory board for our skilled and construction trades. And we're doing that in conjunction with CMC. So we're kind of sharing the advisory board duties of our business community. So they don't have to go to multiple different advisory sessions. So that's coming up. So I'll have a report on that for the next time. And I think that's it.
Thank you. Director Ramirez. Not appreciation.
Yep. Oh, the only thing I wanted to comment is, I think it would be good, Chief Cole, to send out an email to our principals and remind them to please invite us, to invite the board representatives of their schools and their upcoming events. I know some of them are having back to schools, and tomorrow, Two Rivers is having their event for Hispanic Heritage Month. So I just want to make sure that we get back into that cadence of inviting us to the things that they're having. Oh, and then I also wanted to just ask if we could possibly add the major meetings and events to our calendars, to our district calendars, just in case we have availability to add them, because right now, like, unless we put it into our calendar, it doesn't exist. And I think it should just be part of our calendar.
And you mean like things like family advisory councils, equity advisory council, those kinds of?
Yeah, and the
District-
upcoming strategic planning meetings too.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Director Torres.
So I don't have anything quite yet to update with the Roaring Fork Schools Foundation. I'll meet with Dave and Kelly in the next few days and provide an update on the board structure at our next meeting. I just wanted to give that to you to plant the seed. I would, is this, okay, just to clarify this time, if we bring up future agenda.
You can, yeah.
Okay, so I had also included on the board tracker, the additional discussion around the attendance policy and love to go just with deeper discussion in the goals and the purpose of some of those attendance policy strategies. And if the overarching, approach is perhaps still meeting the purpose and the goal for what it's intended to be doing. So I would like to have that either future agenda item for discussion or work session discussion as well.
Thank you. Director Tyler.
Just a little bit of an update on Meadowood. I know that we heard that there's a missing part fitting for a water line that is holding up the progress of construction there, but haven't visited there. It's an amazing scene that's happening and lots of people milling around and some great stuff happening. And on a plus side, as of now, the budget is looking really good up until this point, and there hasn't been much unexpected budget items up until this point. So that's great.
Thank you. I don't have anything to report at this time. I feel like there are always so many things swirling in my head that I'm not sure what is appropriate to report during this time, but I do want to echo your suggestion for a future agenda topic. I think that I'm hearing that in my community and from people in the community, that I think there's just a misunderstanding about the attendance policy and the push, and this notion that we just changed it coming into the school year, when in actuality it hasn't been changed. And just so we have a better understanding of what, because I did some research myself into like, what does the state say for attendance? What is policy driven? And so we have that understanding so that when we're talking to people in the community, we can better relay the message. I think would be helpful. Anyone else on the board think that that's a worthwhile endeavor to discuss attendance policy? Just so we have some sort of consensus.
I'd be good with that. I've definitely heard different things at different schools about things, especially related to like school visits and how that counts as attendance. And so I think that'd be a good discussion.
Yeah, and I think it would be good too for us to get you all the feedback that we're hearing from the community about their questions related to it. So, okay.
When I
try
say
to get
school
that.
visits, I meant college visits.
I got it. I don't know if everybody did, but yeah, I've heard that same sentiment. Okay, so we'll move on to appreciations before our final agenda item. And we will begin with Director Ramirez.
Thank you to our team for providing us with that preliminary data. I think it's always great to look at that. I look forward to us following up on a work session to discuss that. And can you believe it's September 20th already, guys? I mean, thank you to all of our teachers who are diving deep with our students and keeping par for the new school year. So yeah.
Director Torres.
As Dr. Cole mentioned, there are a lot of field trips going on. I just have a tremendous amount of appreciation for the schools, the teachers, the leaders, everyone involved in providing these amazing opportunities to students. It is really exciting to hear students be excited because they're going on a field trip and they cannot wait to get to school to visit a museum that maybe they've never seen before, or go on a camping trip, or do really things that lend itself well to learning outside the classroom. And I think that those are a lot of work that don't always get the acknowledgement and the appreciation that they so heartily deserve. So a big thanks to all of those that have been involved. It's been awesome.
Thank you. Director Tyler.
A couple of appreciations I'd like to give. First of all is I got to visit the Operations Center in Glenwood along with Dr. Cole and Chief Bomfach, and it was just a really great trip to see the behind the scenes of what happens in so many different parts of our district that is sort of seems to be in the periphery, but is so important to the day-to-day operations. And it was really nice to get a better understanding of all the great work that's being done there. And I would also like to just sort of say, give a shout out to all the like events that go around this time of year that have to do with like college fairs and seniors and applying for their future. And so for all the seniors who's putting in all this great work that is hard on them and stressful, and just to keep up the great work and do what you're doing. And I would like to say thank you to Roaring Fork High School for the college fair that they put on last week. It was well attended by state schools, and I think it was a great opportunity for the students to get to ask questions and help clarify what they're hoping to do in their future. And so great job to the seniors and the counselors who put on all of those great things.
Director Stepp.
I'm not sure who was responsible, but I want to thank all the people that worked together to bring Jane Goodall here. Like, what an amazing opportunity for our students. So kudos to everyone that made that happen. I had one other one too. So what Director Torres was saying, I have a new boss that just moved to town, and she has a third grader. And she was saying like how much she loves all the field trips, because when she moved from Nebraska, all they did was work. So it's having a positive impact.
I have a couple. So first I want to thank Principal Waller and all the staff at BES who welcomed the dual language of New Mexico into the schools this week. And they came to visit the classrooms. They spent a couple days and really provided feedback on the dual language program, and, provided feedback areas to improve, and just the amount of energy that it took to host them was incredible. And just the commitment to improvement, to seeking out information and feedback from an organization like that, I think is incredible. So a shout out to them for that. And then also a thanks to Chief Park for your leadership and commitment to data and improvement for all of our students, and your sincere and passionate belief that they can all achieve and all improve. I think that I genuinely feel that sitting here. And so thank you very much for that and for your leadership in that regard. We're going to jump back out of order to item 10 on the agenda, which is an executive session pursuant to section 24-6-4024A CRS for the purchase, acquisition, lease, transfer, or sale of any real, personal, or other property interest, specifically related to the district's property located at 228 Flying M Ranch Road, Glenwood Springs, Colorado 81601, inviting Acting Superintendent Cole, Chief Baumfock, and Chief Markham. Is there a motion?
Second.
I move that the board go into executive session pursuant to section 24-6-4024A CRS, the purchase, acquisition, lease, transfer, or sale of any real, personal, or other property interests specifically related to the district's property located at 228 Flying M Ranch Road, Glenwood Springs, 81601, along with Acting Superintendent Cole, Chief Baumfock, and Chief Markham.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I would like to note that I'll be recusing myself from this executive session, so I will not be in attendance.
You're coming back here to close.
Yes, we will come back to the big room to close out the meeting. And Director Ramirez will do that.
Okay, the board is now returning from executive session. The time is 8:40 p.m. We want to make sure to note that our next board meeting has changed times to October 11th. So we want to make sure that the public has time, and we will be updating our website to communicate that. If there is no further business and there's no objection, the meeting will be adjourned. It is 8:40 p.m.